I hope you had a lovely lunch. And of course, this is a treat. This is like a fantastic dessert and cafecito, this fantastic panel that we're going to have soon. This panel is called Civil Society Responses. My name is Astrid Arraras, and I teach in the Department of Politics and International Relations. And I'm delighted to be the moderator of this panel. I want to thank Marco Steele, Madame Kristen Sanchez, and the whole staff, Ernesto, for inviting me, for organizing this event. And I want to congratulate my students who are going to be little by little coming in and for coming here. I think it's fantastic that we have these opportunities for our students to be exposed to different ideas, perspectives, information. So thank you so much for being here today. So I'm going to start introducing our speakers. I'm going to start with Marcie Washington, from our department, and I suppose these are the members of our panel, our panelists, but I'm not going to start in that order. I'm going to start with the order of the program. So Ernesto, you're last. And so I'm going to go first. Is Marcie Washington. Marcie Washington is an associate teaching professor and associate director of undergraduate studies in our Department of Politics and International Relations at FIU. She received her master's degree in international affairs from the College of Social Science at the Florida State University and her Ph.D. in conflict analysis and resolution from Nova Southeastern University. Her research interests are diverse, but she mostly focuses on topics related to conflict and cooperation, international and domestic migration, and transnational and domestic security. Her research, Dr. Washington's research interests assist in delivering and understanding that refugees, the diaspora, and internally displaced persons are also challengers who have the capacity in certain political and social environments to organize unrest and promote peace. Her work builds upon the rich and current scholarship of conflict and peace studies, demonstrating that understanding collective action is impractical in the absence of close attention to how memories influence collectives to engage in contentious tactics to reframe a real and/or perceived grievance from the past to reinforce their desired identity. When teaching about international relations, security studies, conflict and cooperation, and the politics of immigration, she delves into the social, psychological, and social-political processes that occur within and between groups that promote collective action and cooperation. And Dr. Washington is going to talk about civil society actors in conflict and cooperation, the role of refugees, diaspora, and internally displaced persons in political and social environments to promote peace. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Washington. You know how to work, I think. Ernesto will teach you.
He's a panelist and IT.
Yes.
Good afternoon. No, good afternoon? Good afternoon. As my students in the early morning class know, I always say good morning, and even if they don't want to say it, they kind of arbitrarily have to say it back to me, just to earn fake bonus points, and they know I'm really good for that. Really good for that. I want to give thanks to Dr. Teal, the director, the associate director, Kristen, and the doctoral student, Ernesto /IT guy, for the EU John Monnet Center for Excellence for inviting me here today. I'm excited to be in this space just to talk to you a little bit about the nexus between migrants, civil society, and peace. So if I go off a little bit off of what I have written, be patient with me in this process, okay? Now, when we're thinking about migrants' contribution to development, peace building, and conflict in the homeland, it has received, as you already know, throughout the course of today, a number of considerations and conversations about it and the role that they play. The migration literature out there, it literally, as you know, for those in my course and faculty and colleagues that are here, it is layered in a variety of reasons on why people move, right? People move for different reasons. Some move to join family, some move to join friends, But also, as you know, a number of them, I apologize for that, moved because of insecurity. And as I'm trying to get this, you know, that's what happened when you don't use PowerPoints enough. Bear with me as I try to get it back. It really went far, didn't it?
Went far.
There it is, finally. Now we got some numbers for y'all to look at. If you don't know the numbers, you can look at them now again, okay? But a number of people also move because of forced, involuntary reasons. They also move because of food insecurity. They move because of violent conflict. They move because of environmental disasters. Or they move just because of a lack or limited amount of social justice or simply human rights, right? So because of this, what we can say, as noted in the previous slide here, I don't need to touch this thing at all because it's very sensitive, I see, right? Is that right now we have at least 281 million individuals that live outside their country of origin, right? Of this number, 3.6% of them are from the world population. Of this number here, as you saw in the previous slide, 89.3 million of these numbers here total are refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons who were forcibly displaced as well, okay? So the numbers are not pretty, as you know. And by the way, as I like to tell a number of individuals, the number's not 100% accurate either. This is based on the state supplying this number, and also for individuals to advise them of their concerns and actually be accounted in these spaces, right? But nonetheless, considering these numbers and the increasingly globalized world that we're in, and increased mobility of individuals, the long distance capacity for participation in homeland politics here in itself, I think it's vital, and it has been vital for us, and why we're here today, to discuss the role that migrants are playing in shaping the political and social environment in the host society, but not only the host society, but the country of origin. Now, while there's a lot of evidence out there that's illustrating that they can play a role, there's not enough hard evidence. And that's where there's a vacuum in this research on how they are impacting development and how they are impacting conflicts. So it still remains unclear on the true systemic method that they are doing. So therefore, within this presentation that we have here today that I'm diving into you, I'm going to obviously discuss the role of CSOs, civil society organizations, diasporas, but also specifically the role CSOs can give to promote voice and agency to those that are seemingly voiceless. And I'm saying seemingly voiceless because we're just supporting their empowerment. We're not giving them empowerment, but we're supporting them in these spaces as CSOs. So when you think about diasporas as translocal, a common broad definition of diaspora, for those who are not aware, is that there are people with a common origin who reside more or less on a permanent basis outside of the borders of their ethnic and religious homeland. Thus, when you think about the term diaspora, you think about that definition that is out there, specifically by Shine and Barth, and they did it in, I think, in 2003 or so. This term encompasses immigrants, stateless populations, expatriates. It includes also refugees. Further, when you think about this definition, it illustrates the transnational and local networks that diasporas hold and can hold that is not solely based upon the linkages that they have to the homeland, right? But it's to a specific, also to the specific host country in which they are in and the region. So when you think about the term diaspora, which is distinct, said again, distinct from immigrants or refugees, this term here indicates that the members of diasporas are creating new links in the host society, but simultaneously they're maintaining the political and social links in their homeland with either passive or active engagement, okay? Whereas an immigrant, for instance, may be from the second generation, right? And they are not trying to maintain links within the homeland, but they're creating new identity within a host society that they're in. Simply, it illustrates that identities and cultures are not territorially bounded at all, especially when we consider the reality of digital technology, right? So when you're thinking about digital technology, specifically when you have digital geography and the digital space that we're in, digital technology play a crucial role. I'm sure many of you are on social media platforms. I'm sure you're on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram, or I like to tell everybody else the Twit account, otherwise known as Twitter, right? These same spaces that you're in have diasporas in it. And the digital technology in itself is playing a crucial role in the contemporary forms of nationalism and the community boundary creation from a bottom-up approach instead of a top-down approach, which allows more voice to the voiceless. Changes in technology, as you already heard me say, also when it comes to the speed of communication and also when how does it play a role in a movement of ideas, it has contributed to the challenging the traditional sovereign borders, and it's expanded the transnational role of diasporas as political and social agents in their homeland and host society. So the internet has given them the capacity that they didn't have before. Besides just seeing, P.D. on there for a quick second, 30-second reel, you actually have opportunity for these diasporas to connect. And they have numerous platforms on these accounts to remain connected beyond this territory in itself. So when you're considering this, going further into understanding these spaces that they're in, I need to put forth to you that diasporas are bridge builders. You've heard that throughout today with the gentleman earlier that's a lawyer in this space as well. And because of this, a number of literature has often reinforced this securitization trope. The securitization trope, which is highlighting the idea that diasporas are playing a role in promoting conflicts in the homeland and how they're promoting international terrorism. This has especially come to the forefront, I would say, more in the 1990s, right? When we had states beginning to move a little bit beyond just looking at migration as a domestic concern, but also looking more at the international dynamics as well. So this understanding of international migration resulted in putting the stress, because of the securitization trope, reinforcing this refugee warrior dynamic, the refugee warrior dynamic. And then also reinforcing the idea that financial flows that is coming from these host societies, these remittances, are also supporting conflict in the homeland. They're supporting ammunition, they're supporting combatants to engage in bad behavior. Consequently, migrants coming from many conflict zones were simply codified and looked upon as peace wreckers, right? Thus raising indiscriminate suspicion toward these entire population altogether. This unfortunate, narrow, dichotomous narrative is influenced by limited understanding of the complexity and diversity of diaspora groups and how and when they mobilize. Conversely, there's a better part of the story, right, while we're here. Other studies have shown that diaspora groups have shown a lot of potential to reduce conflict, to promote the democratization, process, to promote community development, or contribute to the economic development of the country of origin, providing these spaces that are fragile for some higher level of stability, right? So they're becoming to look upon also as peace builders, right? So it is in this complex, multidimensional environment with numerous stakeholders that diasporas realize that they hold a unique position. And they hold this unique position, I would say, unlike governments, corporations, and some non-governmental organizations, because those other organizations cannot gain a foothold because they lack trust. They lack a level of legitimacy that these groups hold in their country of origin, because they have a higher understanding of what's going on in those spaces. And because they have a higher understanding, they are respected and they're listened to a tad bit more. Where these power brokers, the governments, as I noted already, the corporations, are looked upon as, top-down bureaucrats in suits, for lack of a better way to describe it, okay? So because of this framing here, because of this understanding of diasporas are able to get a better foothold in these spaces in itself, this has resulted into the adoptions of efforts such as the Global Compact of Migration and the International Organization of Migration, organizing, for instance, of many things they do, the Global Diaspora Summit. And this Global Diaspora Summit prioritizes and encourages, let me say it again, it prioritizes and encourages the strategic role of transnational communities as agents, but not just agents, but also accelerators of sustainable development. Because of this, over 110 countries of origin have literally established divisions and policies to facilitate the movement and support of these diaspora communities, to have them supporting with capital, have them supporting with economics, have them supporting with the stability of the social and political resources of that country in itself, to provide them the space to support constructive engagement by also strengthening the homeland. For example, we see this in Mexico, right? They have established a consultative council of the Institute for Mexicans Abroad, and the diaspora has a full support and voice at the table on what can and cannot occur in these spaces. But also it occurs in Nigeria, where the diasporas literally lobbied for the diaspora, let me get my words together, right? Let me do that. The diasporas literally lobbied for the creation of the Nigerian National Volunteer Service, and they adopted the National Diaspora Day. In 1999, the Nigerian Constitution even went further by supporting this with the dual citizenship. Most recently, they also put forth the Brain Circulation Strategic Program. What is that all about, you said? Even though you didn't ask, I'll just answer it anyway. This program is about the diasporas to be able to support their economic ecosystem by providing them with skill circulation coming back in from those abroad. Notwithstanding, even though diasporas are doing a wonderful job in providing opportunity and supporting the government's efforts, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that the diaspora's efforts, as acknowledged also by practitioners, are limited. They're limited in their efforts because they have a tendency to reinforce more of that cultural reconnections in itself, rather than actual providing more space for social cohesion and aid programs, and providing space for those low capacity groups. That's where this has been able to widen the tent a little bit further to provide space for civil society to come in. Civil society in itself have become the strategic option. Why? They've become the strategic option because they give more voice to the table. They allow the local and transnational group to have a say in bringing about change, to promote constructive development and peace. They are a group that, whether they're voluntary or whether they're professional, small, big individuals, it doesn't matter if it's tribal, religious, whatever they are playing a role in the strategic impact on the ground with their leadership. And not just their leadership, but also their innovative practices that they give way to. Because of these innovative practices in their leadership, and because they are allowing and reinforcing the voice of the diaspora and the local population, right, and these low capacity groups, they have literally been looked upon as a good to provide stability and in these fragile spaces. One of the examples I'm gonna give real quick in the widening of the tent is one that's even for you youth that are in here. It's called Green Hope, right? Green Hope is an international youth-led not-for-profit that operates in 28 countries. Not one, not 10, 28 countries, and is led by youth. Because of them advocating with fellow youth, they are able to understand the dynamics of the concerns of the youth, and they're able to address it with the youth at the table with them. So it even gives opportunity. Civil society organizations also give opportunity for the youth to have a voice. It's more than just adults, I'm saying to you, okay? So simply, civil society is the arena that's outside the family, the state, and the market, which is created by individuals and collective action, organizations and institutions to advance shared interests. Keyword there is shared interests. This has resulted into civil society being viewed as essential for the peace process because they're able to play a critical role. And because they're able to play a critical role, before I go to that previous slide there, I want to also just bring in an example for you guys on the critical role they played is think about the role that the Colombianos, or they call it the Colombianos por la Paz, the role that they played in actually assisting and bringing the FARC to the table and actually having them release at least 40 hostages in February of 2012. And this was through the informal process because there was no formal network occurring. And because of that informal networking that they were engaging with, through 45 letters, at least 45 letters if I remember correctly, they were able to illustrate, the FARC was able to illustrate that they were willing to engage in a peace effort. And it opened up the space or a path for political conversations, just by just engaging with civil society. So even though many donors and non-governmental organizations share the commitment of sustainability, peace building, and development, they understand that diasporas are often able to maximize the implementation of projects in geographical spaces easier because of their connections, because of their trust, because of their legitimacy. And civil society groups are able to also build on this trust and legitimacy by giving the diaspora and these other migrant groups voices. But they are also able to do something else, as I'm jumping around still, right? Is that it must be noted that unlike the revolving door and the short-term plans of governmental leadership, because of the revolving door and the short-term plans of governmental leadership, civil society groups are able to somewhat balance this erratic interaction with long-term strategic planning with local and transnational voices. America, we have a president for how long? Then we have a new one, maybe? And then a new one? And then a new one? And then it's time to talk about the long-haul people in Congress, but I'll keep going, right? So it is in this environment that translocal diasporas, with their partnership with civil society organizations, they are able to facilitate inclusive peace-building efforts and development activities in the homeland. They're able to move beyond this notion that diasporas do not support this, or rather, they're able to move beyond this notion that diasporas are blank slates, let me say it that way, and that they only have an identity based on trauma and conflict. They instead understand that diasporas have agency, they have choice, they have simply deep knowledge. And because of that agency, deep choice, deep knowledge that they have in the community and connections, CSOs, civil society organizations have been engaging them more and more, okay? So when you're thinking about how do we integrate them, how do we build in this space and that there's no one size fits all type of framing, we need to understand that despite being theoretically separate from the government, civil society organizations must still operate within the existing sovereign spaces. Okay? And diasporas must abide by the laws in the host society and homeland. Hence, if we're trying to work with this diaspora groups, if we really are truly trying to engage civil society organizations to promote peace and development activities, we need to be aware of these possible issues that is hindering or challenging their engagement, such as legal regulations, lack of security, politics, oh fun politics, right? Geography, or just being simply controlled from engaging with the peace process. But then when you think about diasporas and their capacity, we need to understand too that diasporas can be also limited because of how they're being perceived. You heard the young lady speak about that earlier, but how perception and language can play a role, and how that can influence how you view them as either a political or social asset in the host society or the country of origin. In addition, it is pertinent to consider the levels of social and political integration that the diaspora have in this host society. Do they really have the space to have the regularity of planning for their life? Do they have the space to truly be economically sound? And say they have a job and they can go out? Or are they always working in maybe some backdoor employment? Are they working under the table and they really still never have the space to truly get good health care? So we need to think about those dynamics when it comes to think about diaspora's capacity. Simply, not all of them have the capacity. That's what I'm bringing up to you. And the type of capacity that they have, it influences their level of engagement with the country of origin and how they are engaging in the peace and development society in itself. Or rather, said that wrong. How they are engaging in the origin society, the country of origin. You know, you're getting tired when you're speaking in tongues now, right? So their mobilization in itself is influenced by how they're being integrated in the whole society. Now put that word integration like that because it's relative, right? I think we need to be mindful of what integration means. It's based upon the needs of that population. It is not upon us to dictate what integration looks like. Right? And that type of integration in the space they have allows them to mobilize and support development activities and the promotion of peace. This has been so pertinent and so important. I want to just show this quick map here. Is that this is a map with OSHA, by the way, and this is the United States Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. This has been so important that OSHA notes that working with civil society is crucial for the efficacy of their mission, and they have a strong commitment to the indispensable role of civil society in democratic life. And it's because of them working with diasporas. They literally have acknowledged the organization that they did recently with the Joint Coordination Center in Ukraine. OSHA did a Joint Coordination Center in Ukraine, and to be able to implement the Black Sea Grain Initiative, to be able to get food out of Ukraine. To get the food out, it involved the partnerships of civil society organizations and the connections that the diasporas had in those spaces. Without that, the situation of food insecurity in many spaces around the world would be worse. So basically, when you're thinking about this for practitioners, for us in itself, choosing which peace building and development strategies to pursue requires a deep understanding of the context. It requires a deep understanding of what is going on in the situation that the diaspora is in, or the CSOs are found in, to be able to mobilize and to bring about change, because once they are involved, they can truly bring about systemic change that is longitudinal. And that's what we want. We don't want a situation where there's a top-down, state-centered approach. Civil society allows us to move beyond this to a bottom-up approach, if you give them the space for it. And we keep saying that, okay? So to make this final note here for you guys, when civil society organizations integrate diaspora groups in their peace and development process, but not as a side-on, or not as an add-on, or not just to tick another box, or not just to solely benefit the whole society in a performative way, or just to provide them a little bit more legitimacy, when you add CSOs and diasporas to the table in a true collaborative way, you actually can bring about inclusive peace and development activities that gives a space for all to hopefully be able to get to a higher level of their development in the world, to really promote those sustainable development goals, those SDGs. So civil society organizations have realized to support inclusive peace development, activities must be able to bring forth the idea that individuals and groups, when they stand together and they lift where they stand, true change can occur. Okay. I think my slide was migrating around too. Everything's migrating.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for a fantastic presentation of the Washington. That was great. Well, my next panelist, let me go back to, okay, Ernesto, we need to, let me see. No, let me see. Oh, yeah, we have to get out of the PowerPoint, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not like my minor, so I don't touch it. Yeah, let me go to the next one. Perfect, yes. You have several hats too. Jack of all trades. Well, my next panelist is Kristen Guskovict. Yes, I pronounced it. Kristen established KLG Consulting Services in 2013. KLG Consulting Services created Heart of Aid work in 2017 to support the psychosocial needs of aid workers and refugees. As a social worker, Kristen has learned that self-care starts with program design and delivery. By providing aid workers with necessary skills to deliver quality service to traumatized people, their vulnerability to burnout is decreased. Kristen brings over 15 years of experience working with refugees, including unaccompanied minors and torture survivors. She has worked with humanitarian agencies and peacekeeping operations in Africa, Asia, and Eastern Europe. Kristen is currently acting as the interim clinical director for Partners in Trauma Recovery, a Berkeley, CA, California-based organization that works to address the psychosocial impacts of trauma amongst people surviving international human rights abuses. Kristen holds a master's degree in global affairs with a concentration in humanitarian assistance from New York University and a master's degree in social work from Florida International University. And she speaks French, Spanish, and of course English. Thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming.
Thank you all for having me. I don't have a PowerPoint, so can I just close this? I guess let me start by saying, obviously, thank you for all of you being here. I know that it's a long day. You've learned a lot already. There's a lot more to learn. And I hope that you're getting an opportunity to take some of it in, because as we're talking about civil society, we're a part of that. So some of what I'm going to talk about today is what we do here in the US, and how complicated it is, and how mind-boggling it is, and how many times I pull my hair out, and how many times I'm amazed by it. Or at least a few examples of all of it, because I've been doing this for far too long to remember all of it, but I will do my best. So let me also mention that, of course, I'm not an expert in anything, because I'm not an academic. I don't study these things. I experience them based on my work. So what I'm going to give to you is my experience, my observation, and the things that people have given to me that I've heard and learned. Some of it might be fully accurate and totally resonate with everybody in this room, and others might not. So that's my starting point. I am a social worker, which means I also think about the circumstance of people in their environments. That's what social work studies. And that means that what I look at is how people are influenced by their environment. For example, I do not have a PowerPoint because I'm influenced by my chaotic professional environment at this moment. And so I'm hoping that throughout this conversation I can sort of paint the picture for you in a way that is relatively accessible. But of course there'll be opportunities for questions, and hopefully you will ask. So I am looking at notes. You will see me look down every once in a while. You'll also notice that sometimes I go off script. That's how I work. So do you need anything? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's better like that.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, great. So, we said all that. So let me start, as a clinician, for me it is important to start with some of the common elements of somebody's experience as a refugee. And within the paradigm of traumatology, we actually call this the triple trauma paradigm. I don't know if anybody in this room has ever heard of this, but if you have, please bear with me. I'm going to reintroduce you to it. And if you haven't, it's kind of important, because somebody who's coming in has gone through a lot, and we know that. But let me explain. So the triple trauma paradigm posits that there are at least 3 traumatic situations that any refugee coming into the US will have already experienced. The first is what's called disruption. Disruption is that period of time before you leave home. It's the mounting stress. Am I safe or not? Do I stay or go? I'm not sure. It's watching the increased instability around in your neighborhood. It's hearing bombings. It's hearing yelling. And it's still wondering, is it better to stay and wait this out, because this is my home? Or is it better to go and start all over again? And that second one does not sound good most of the time. I can give you an example. You might have heard in my intro that I worked in Ukraine. That was not very long ago. And I had a good friend who was talking to me as he was trying to figure out whether or not to leave. I worked in the Donbass region, so you may recall that that is an area that is pretty severely involved in the war. Has been, is, will continue to be. So we were talking, and he said exactly that. I don't know if I should stay or go. I have a 1-year-old child, but this is my home. This is everything I know. This is my family, this is my community, this is my language, this is where I can work. This is how I envision my future. If I wait, can I get it back? And if I don't, what happens next? For him, it was a choice between two evils. And he did eventually choose to resettle in another country, and he is safe and sound. He would argue that, because it's still new. It's not easy yet. And let me explain some of these reasonings as we go forward. The second part of the triple trauma paradigm is disruption, or displacement. Displacement is the period between when you leave home and when you get to wherever you're going. This can happen in days, weeks, months, years. It can take a long time. For the example of Ukraine, it happened in days, weeks, and months, sometimes up to a year for those who are just leaving now. And it takes a long time because, for example, in Ukraine, of course, there are very few trains anymore, and if you're on them, you're very exposed. And the tracks are no longer good, and the roads are no longer good, and so everything is hard to manage. If you're in the Congo, you don't know who to trust. You don't know when you can leave, and there's a lot of leaving by night, trying to figure out how to get to wherever's next. Heightened stress and anxiety for days, weeks, months, sometimes years. Because displacement includes refugee camps. For those of you who have not experienced a refugee camp, I can tell you they are horrendous. They're not someplace anybody should have to stay for any period of time, let alone weeks, months, decades. Decades. Sometimes up to 30 years in camps. Camps, they're not, I think we have sort of an idealized version of what this must be because we're thinking about how people should be taking care of each other, and that is not what they are. They are bare bones, basic, dirty, horrible places. With the best of intentions, with the hopes that people get to leave at some point, and in fake communities, right? People leave, people get to where they're going, and they end up staying wherever they are, which means you have neighbors you don't know, maybe don't speak your language, maybe didn't have your experience. How can you rely on each other for safety? How can you rely on each other for anything? You can't yet. Maybe you never can. That's displacement. And then there's resettlement. Resettlement is included in this. Why? Because people learn they're going to leave this camp and they think it's going to get better. I'm going to be safer. I'm going to understand. Life is going to get easier. Right. And then they get here. And there's language issues, and there's issues with culture, and there's issues with the idealized individualistic way that we do things here, which does not work for most communities that are having refugee crises. It's not easier. So again, for example, I work a lot with the Bhutanese community. They had a really high rate of suicide when they first got here, mostly with their aging population, because their aging population kept asking themselves, is it better that I left? I'm not able to contribute here. I can't be the elder here. I can't give my wisdom here. Nobody listens to me here because what I have to say isn't relevant here. Okay, so 3 traumatic events. Does not mean anybody's traumatized. Let me be very clear. Trauma is accumulative. It's based on your history. It's based on your family's history. It's based on a lot of things that make you vulnerable, but it does not mean that you are going to be traumatized. What it does mean is that you're more likely to have a hard time concentrating, learning, listening, adapting at first. That's the entry point for anybody coming in as a refugee in this country. And we try and help as civil society because that's what we want to do. So I'm going to look at my notes for a second to make sure I didn't go too far off script. And I'm going to grab some water because I'm talking fast, I'm getting nervous. I took my water with me. Oh, that's good. Yeah, so smart. So the role of civil society is actually quite significant when a refugee is coming into this country. Within the context of the US, we have what are called 9 VOLAGs, voluntary agencies. If you have not heard that acronym before, it refers to the 9 oversight agencies that work with all of the resettlement agencies throughout the country. They are Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, Episcopalian Ministries, Ethiopian Community Development, International Rescue Committee, Church World Service, World Relief. You may have noticed that 7 of the 9 are religious. Yes, everybody takes every refugee. Yes, everybody helps every refugee. Yes, it does create some challenges sometimes, but that's the basis of the system that we have. There are still tons of other civil society organizations, ESL programs, mental health programs, what are called refugee self-help programs. Those are relatively newly arrived refugees who set up their own organizations to help each other, and they're amazing, but also complicated. So there's a lot of different places of entry point for people to help. But refugees coming into this world, their entry point is resettlement agencies. Resettlement agencies will help them find everything else. It's kind of like having somebody pick you up from the airport and tell you exactly where you need to go and what you need to do next. It's super helpful if you are a refugee coming through a traditional channel. But it's gotten complicated these last few years, so let me explain. I tried to figure out how to explain this easily, so if I lose you, let me know. But anyways, over the past 6 to 8 years, of course, refugee resettlement has had significant impacts because of the divisive US political system, right? You probably know that the number of refugees invited into the US each year is set by the president. Up until 2015, that was pretty consistent for about 20 years prior to that, where it was 70,000 people a year. Then in 2015, we had the Syrian crisis, and then President Obama decided that we should have 125,000 refugees. Awesome. Then the Trump era came along, and it got gutted to 25,000 refugees. Okay, why am I talking about numbers? I'm a social worker. I have literally no business talking about numbers. You did hear that those numbers are pretty small in comparison to the number of people that have experienced forced migration. But you may not have heard the point that was made that civil society works with government. So our civil society actors, specifically our resettlement groups, are paid based on the number of people they help. So when we had 70,000 a year, we could plan for the next year. We knew where to prioritize, we knew how much staff, we knew how much rent we would need. When it went up to 125,000 a year, we were like, great, we can start to prioritize new things that we know our communities need. And then it went to 25,000. Programs got gutted. Historical knowledge was lost. That means that the relationships that organizations had with landlords, with educational providers, with schools, with employers, gone. Because we don't need them anymore. We can't maintain them anyways. We don't have the staff for it. So, prior to the Afghan crisis, we had almost nothing and almost nobody. And we had very little to work on. Most of our programs had closed, and most of the knowledge of how we used to do things was gone. Now, prior to that point, we used to pick people up from the airport, take them to their new homes with their new furnishings that we had figured out beforehand because we knew they were coming. We were prepared for them. We had thought about what would they need, what would they want, what would help, what language capacity do we need to worry about. All of those things that we had prior knowledge of in the system that is traditional. We'll come back to it because it still exists. But then the Afghan crisis came along, and we brought 70,000 refugees into the US in a very short period of time. Yes, something amazing happened because people do amazing things when they are called to, and I will get to that in a moment because in the process, a lot of chaos happened. A lot of chaos happen, because you guys are all students, you know that in order to get the refugee status, the word refugee, you have to get it outside of the US. We don't process refugees in the US. So all of those 70,000 people that arrived were not refugees. I know this will be shocking, but the refugee resettlement system is set up for refugees. And it doesn't have a lot of space for other people. It has space for asylees when they get asylum. But that's it. So humanitarian parolees is what we were giving our Afghan neighbors as they came in. So these newcomers came in, they had this term, humanitarian parole. We have had it in immigration law for a long time. It is relatively useless. It does not give the permanence of refugee status. So that concept of non-refoulement, which I hope you guys have all heard about, doesn't exist in humanitarian parole. It doesn't give support. There's no refugee resettlement organization helping you out, figuring it out. No, there's nothing. Now, since then, yes, there have been lots of federal orders and ways in which we work around this, but nothing permanent. So the Afghan Adjustment Act is still working its way through Congress. And until it does, people have to apply for asylum, individually, all 70,000, one at a time. Now, I don't know if you know, but our asylum system is bogged down, and let alone the fact that it's got a lot of other problems. It doesn't have enough people, and it doesn't have a system that can manage the people that we were working with before, let alone this. But here we are. So, we have these 70,000 people that came in. We had very limited resources. And we had a lot of really dedicated civil society actors that said, who cares? We're going to do this anyways, and we're going to help. And they did. 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for months. They figured it out without government contracts, without certainty that they would ever get paid back for this. Organizations ran themselves into the ground, and this is amazing. Because yes, civil society in this country is a bunch of do-gooders, and I am absolutely one of them. But we work hard because it matters to us for whatever reason. I'll get to that for myself in a minute as well. This is the problem with written notes. I forget what I'm talking about. So, obviously organizations did an incredible job under the circumstances, and are still doing an incredible job under the circumstances because it continues to change every day with every notice from the government, what we can provide and what we can't. Generally speaking, resettlement is 3 months to a year. That's what people are supported with. It's never been enough. It's definitely not enough now, but it's what we have. So, it's not always what we had. Side note, in the 80s and 70s, we had 5 years of support, and that got gutted. So let me just say, we did know how to do this a little better once, and then we changed our minds, because as you so beautifully explained, governments are fickle, and they change their mind in their short term at best. So here we are with all of these orders and all of these hopes that we will get everybody through some sort of system before it changes again. Right. So, obviously, humanitarian parolees are not treated exactly the same, but they have some level of similarity, but they don't have the permanence. Refugees, right? Humanitarian parolees, asylum seekers, and asylees. Let me add into this mix what is now happening with the Ukrainian refugees that are coming in, because that is a whole other circumstance. Ukrainian refugees who came in the early part of the war, you may know that the war is a year old as of this week. So from February to April, some came in through the southern border, because if you had a chance to leave and you figured out how to get to a country where you had family, you did. It was unsafe. You got here whatever way you could. But those people who came in at first got first humanitarian parole, later TPS, and now some are coming in through the traditional refugee system, and they will get refugee status, which means we have 3 different types of status for one group of people, all of whom who have experienced the same thing and have kind of the same things. It won't be treated the same, especially because of that lack of permanency and because the organizations don't have all the resources for all of the people that are not refugees. are helping for now, because they can for now. So let's talk about this permanency thing for a second. I started working with refugees and in refugee contexts when former Yugoslavia broke up. Yeah, so a while ago. I've seen a few of these. At the time that former Yugoslavia broke up, I was a student studying in Switzerland. I know you guys don't know what this was like in the 90s, but we did not all have cell phones. Cell phones existed, but most of us didn't have them yet. I lived in a youth hostel, and the majority of people that live in a youth hostel for a long period of time are poor students and refugees. That's who lives in a youth hostel for a year, because who else wants to? So, now, because we did not have cell phones, we had a payphone in the hallway, which is interesting now looking back, because I don't know that anything that I know now would be as important to me if I learned it later. Circumstance would have been different, and I might have been able to ignore it better. But we had people in the hall, which meant that we all knew each other's business better than anything else, because you could hear everybody's conversations. You could hear the emotion, the happiness when there was a celebration, the fear when somebody didn't know where somebody was, the sadness when things just were not going right. Myself included, right? They heard when I called home saying, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I want to do this anymore. They heard when I called home and things weren't working well. And we all supported each other. At the time, people coming out of former Yugoslavia were being given an option in Europe called temporary asylum or apply for refugee status. Temporary asylum was a guaranteed safe space for now. Or you could apply for refugee status, but you might not get it. Also would have taken temporary asylum. There is no doubt in my mind that that would have been the option I would have taken. They did. 1996, there was a little bit of a lull in the war, and a lot of governments were taking it as an opportunity to repatriate/deport people back to former Yugoslavia. There were some horrible reports coming out of Amnesty International of plane loads of people leaving whatever country and arriving back into former Yugoslavia, and people never being heard from again. It wasn't time to send people home. But it was for the governments. That's the part of permanency that matters. And that is what we are missing right now for a lot of Ukrainians, a lot of Afghans, and a lot of other people that are relatively stateless and or don't have enough to claim asylum, but don't also have enough safety to go permanent. So I'll talk about those two because they're the biggest communities, but they're not the only ones. That's true of every group that's getting TPS right now too, which many of you might have friends who are in that circumstance. I do. It's Miami. We're pretty good at that understanding, sort of, if we pay attention. So the difference is pretty significant. And then when we think about it psychologically, the difference between I'm safe and I'm not safe, can I plan ahead? Do I feel like I have a place in this world? Yes, no. It's important to note that there are rifts between refugees, of course, as well, right? Refugees see the differences that they're experiencing. One Afghan refugee that I was working with a while ago said, Kristen, I see how people are treating the Ukrainian crisis. I see how people are opening their homes and their doors and their houses for people. And I wonder, what does that mean about how they see me? Because that is not how I get treated. And he's right. Because not only do refugees have the opportunity to rebuild their society, but they have the opportunity to rebuild ours. Because they have other experiences, which is amazing. Good and bad, and indifferent, which we could learn from if we weren't looking at them as if they were the problem sometimes. And unfortunately, people do that. So going to, sorry, I've lost my because I get a little passionate about this stuff because it matters. So of course we've talked a little bit about Afghanistan, we've talked about Ukraine and the messiness that we currently have with the different types of status that we have with them. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention we still have traditional resettlement happening. In the last couple of years, we've welcomed people from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which we've been doing for a number of years, as well as Rohingya refugees from Burma/Myanmar. Their needs are different. People who have lived in refugee camps, I mentioned that they're gross, have had a lack of sanitation, a lack of access to solid formal education, a lack of opportunity to get jobs, a lack of opportunity to plan their own lives for a very long time. Their needs are different than somebody who's coming from a space that just saw war, Ukraine, Afghanistan, wherein they had opportunities for formal education, for jobs, to live at their homes with their families prior to coming here. It's totally different. The system does not create differences. It is a one-size-fits-all model, which is why we have to rely on so many others, but their needs are very different, especially if you think about somebody coming in without a formal education who now does not have the ability to concentrate in the same way because of the experiences that they've had, and then you sit them in a classroom. And you say, you should be able to learn English, or whatever. No. We're expecting something unreasonable at the moment. People can and will learn, but eventually. So that is to say there's a lot of different ways that we could be helping. There's a lot of different organizations and people that are helping. There's a lot of different ways civil society can be involved, which is good because it does take a village, an incredibly large village, to welcome people in and to help the rest of society absorb the diversity that they're not ready or used to. It is ridiculous that we still have to say that in 2023, but we do. Which means we still have to recognize that there's a lot of work to do to just explain to people how complex this is, how hard this is, how difficult it is for somebody to decide to come here and then get here, knowing that others are left home, left behind, lost. Knowing that their family members might not be able to stay, but they might be able to. Knowing that there's still so much uncertainty about what's going to happen. And then, of course, there's all the challenges that happen with intergenerationally as people stay. I'll leave that for another day. Recently, there's actually been another evolution in refugee resettlement. The State Department opened up a sponsorship program. I don't know if anyone has heard of it. It's kind of an interesting idea. It is based on a Canadian model. And the general idea is any 5 people can come together and sponsor a refugee who's already in line to come into the US. That sponsorship will be in support of what is already happening within refugee resettlement. So it's an added sense of community for people. It has some real potential. It also has some downfalls because, of course, volunteers have no idea what they're getting themselves into most of the time. I say that because I work with an organization that works primarily with volunteers, and I love that they want to do it. But refugees are not always, you gotta be grateful that you're doing this. People who experience refugee crises don't want to be here. They never wanted to be here in the first place, most of them. That's not the goal. So, if you're going to help, if you're going to consider something like sponsorship, remember, that's because you want to, not necessarily because they want you to. Doesn't mean that friendships can't be formed. It just means that what you might be looking for is not going to be available because it's not. I don't know that any of us would feel any differently if we had to change where we live. I've traveled a lot. I love traveling. I would love to live other places on my choice. Knowing that I will be able to see my family again. Knowing that I will be able to connect with them easily. It is not an experience that a refugee or somebody who's experiencing now temporary protection, humanitarian parole, or any other variation thereof that we want to talk about, including a lot of undocumented immigrants as well. Most refugees will tell you they were undocumented someplace along the way before they were refugees, and that's true, because that's how the journey goes. So this program that they started in the State Department is a pilot program. It is not open to everyone yet. It's currently not open to anyone from Africa or Asia. It is open to Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and Ukrainians. It is only open to sponsor refugees that are currently in the pipeline. So if you have a family member in one of those places who is not currently applying for refugee status, they will not be eligible yet. Civil society can be flexible in that. It could be an opportunity, but you need to remember that people coming in have a lot on their minds, and we need to be a little patient with them and ourselves as we figure out how to do this. optimistic sometimes, super jaded other times, and very grateful that you all are sitting here listening to this, and I hope that you got something out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. I think it was a great contribution to this conference that you have this perspective from a practitioner. You bring so much life to this conference and personal experiences. And now I'm going to go and introduce Ernesto, but Ernesto, go back. Oh yeah, I have the other person, the other IT expert. Now it's gone. Now they don't see what's happening. We don't know what to ask.
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yes. So let me introduce our next panelist is Ernesto Fiocchetto. I pronounced it correctly, right?
Yes.
Beautiful. And Ernesto has a master's degree in religious studies from FIU and a master in art in international studies at FIU. And he's a sociologist from Universidad Nacional de Cuyo, Mendoza, Argentina, 2015. That's where you get your degree. He's a doctoral candidate in international relations at Florida International University, where he serves as a graduate assistant at the Miami, Florida Monnet European Center of Excellence at FIU. In 9 years of teaching and research, his interests have centered on the multiple intersections of religious identities, migration, international politics, and gender and sexuality, mainly focusing on Latin America, the European Union, and the United States. For his dissertation project, he studies the agency of faith actors, including faith-based organizations, religious communities, and religious leaders, in the reception and integration of LGBTIQ+, Latin Americans claiming asylum in Spain and the US. He has several publications in Spanish and English and presented his research at some of the most prestigious academic conferences in the US and Europe. Please join me in welcoming Ernesto. Oh no.
And he's also teaching in the summer. So in case
Yes.
Oh, yes. What are you teaching in the summer? So we have some free advertising.
Well, I'll be teaching theories in IR and refugees, migration and refugees. Your class. That one.
Yeah.
Because I recently
Kristen, do we have our?
No, it's okay.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So before I start with the presentation, thank you for the introduction. And I want to say thank you especially to Marcus, to Dr. Thiel, and to Christine. And for me, this conference has been a very nice opportunity, a fantastic opportunity. I was yesterday talking to some of the authorities in SIPA, and I was having that in general graduate students, most of us do not have the possibility that I have to organize this, to be in touch with a lot of people, so I really appreciate this very much. And I also want to thank all the panelists in this panel and in the previous panels, because one morning they received an email from a crazy student in Miami, and here you are, and you said yes, and you committed to this. So for me and for us, it's very important to have you, so thank you very much. That being said, my presentation is titled At the Intersections of For Migration, Race, Religion, and so yes, that is sexual orientation, gender identities, gender expressions, and sexual characteristics. And in particular, I'm looking at Christian responses to LGBTIQ+ Latin Americans seeking asylum in Spain. This is just a little part of my dissertation project, which is under construction. It's not ready. I mean, I really appreciate that this morning we spoke a lot about Spain. So the general context, you already probably listened or you know something, but just some numbers again, as yesterday our keynote speaker said, that helps us to have a feeling of how important this situation is, because I'm speaking about a very particular intersection, no? Religious organizations working with queer Latin Americans in a particular country. So these are some numbers about Spain from 1995 to 2001. Really, the first law was in 10 years before that, 1985. This morning we spoke about that. But I mean, if we are honest, I mean, they passed the law because that was like a kind of condition to get into the European community. No, because Spain didn't have any problem with migrants. It was the other way about. Spain was a country who sent people everywhere, especially to Latin America. And my grandmother is Spanish. It's from Spain. So, in the middle, I mean, yes, in the mid-90s, this started to be a problem, and look at these beautiful numbers. Because, for example, in 1998, 1.8% of the population of Spain was migrant. They were foreign population. And in 2001, that number came to be just 2.5%. And there you have like the percentage increase. Where did the people come from? I mean, before that, all the people who migrated to Spain were Europeans or people from the MENA region, the North of Africa, particularly Morocco. So here we have a similar situation. We have Morocco, but we also have Ecuador, we have Colombia. And we also, I mean, the people in Spain started to realize that Europeans were not migrating, or were not the most numerous people going there. No? So these were the movements that they saw. The increasing size of the traditional Moroccan community, the trend of increased immigration from Latin America, and the increase in general of non-EU citizens. At that moment it was not the EU, but you know what I mean. These 2.5% became the 13% of the population in 2016. This is how intense the migration flows has been in Spain. Of course, we are not going to just look in details this number, but it's very interesting to just look at inflow and outflows, no? And you can easily recognize the crisis, the crisis of 2008, financial crisis, the so-called migration crisis or crisis of management of migration in Europe, the COVID, and then, I just to be honest, I want to say this, about 2022, this is only the first semester. We do not have the statistics for the whole year, but I wanted to keep that number because it shows that everything is, I mean, the inflows are rising again, and the outflows seems to be decreasing. What really changed is the origin of the population, of the foreign population residing in Spain. If you see not only the numbers, but the relative growth, it is very interesting that those countries with more relative growth are Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Honduras, Argentina, and of course, Ukraine. So the influx and the influence of Latin Americans arriving in Spain is very, very important. Although we are not speaking about that much. When we speak about refugees, we don't speak a lot about Latin American in the European Union. We speak about the MENA region, and we speak about Ukraine. But now, this is another point. These are the figures about accepted and rejected asylum applications for foreign refugees in Spain. And look at this, it's impressive. Only 0.4% of Venezuelans have, they get the refugee status determination. 5.9 in the case of Colombia. And if you look some other numbers, you have, well, for example, Morocco, just thinking of in that other figure, we are speaking about it around the 10%. Oh. So, this is the first point. The second point is this. Well, what's going on with LGBTIQ+ asylum applicants in Spain? Well, I mean, at the background, you will see the incoming asylum applications in Spain from the 2000 to 2021. Unfortunately, we do not have any figures official figures about LGBT asylum for several reasons. I'm going to address now. But we do have some, say, informal figures based on the organizations, civil society organizations that are working with them. And for example, I have the numbers here. ILGA Europe says that in 2009, Spain had 376 applications. In 2014, 1,070, and in the first half of 2022, more than 1,500 applications. So what we can say is that even when we don't know the number, this number is increasing. And hopefully the European Union will make the decision, I hope soon, to have some statistics on this situation. So, we know that there are refugees, that most of them are from Latin America, especially in the last years. We know that there are LGBT refugees, but now the question is, why are we speaking about faith actors? Well, first, we should speak about the whole system, or the reception and integration system in Spain. I will oversimplify this, and I will just say that the law that didn't change for many years this situation is that the reception is centralized by the state government, and the integration is centralized by the communities, by the autonomous communities. How does the central government imply, what do? They rely on civil society organizations for the integration and for the reception of the people, and they only have a real influence in the first administration procedures and in the refugee status determination, blah, blah, blah. But the real reception is run out by these civil society organizations. Exactly the same with the integration in the autonomous communities. When I speak of integration, I'm speaking about language, education, culture, health. Yes, I arrive, I have a place where to eat, but then work is a big topic in Spain, but I'm not going to speak about that. But now the question is, what about these civil society organizations? Who are they? The three most important are CEAR, the Spanish Commission for Refugee Aid, ACCEM, the Spanish Catholic Migration Commission Association, and the Red Cross. And if you send an email to ACNUR, that is the UNHCR version of in Spain, I did that, say, okay, what organizations are there? The official organization working with the government in the reception are these, and I had a list of 18 organizations, 11 of them religious organizations. So faith actors, exactly like in the US, are the organizations that are in charge of the reception and integration of people. Now, the interesting point here is one of the concepts that I'm trying to address in my dissertation is the authority. Why do they have authority to do this? And I think it's really interesting to learn, to understand what is the intersection that they inhabit. Because on the one hand, they are part of the state structure, and they are part of the international regimes. And you say, okay, probably this guy is a little obsessed with religious organization, it's not like that. Well, my friends, let me tell you that last year, the UNHCR called the Multi-Religious Council of Leaders to prepare the forum that we are going to have on refugees this year. Because this situation replicates in many, many, many countries all over the world. So I am interested in this topic, but it's not all about my interest. This is happening. They are part of these systems. As part of these systems, they have a lot of power, but they also are constrained by the obligations that they have. When you receive money from the state, Kristen was speaking about that, well, you also have some limits. You cannot be that critical, probably. No, you cannot. You have to behave. You have to. There are some things that are important. They are also part of the civil society. And here, while I was listening to the fantastic presentations of my two colleagues here, I think that it's fair to make like a brief comment. And this was probably my mistake because I dropped this panel. We have spoken about about a phase of civil society. Civil society is not always this progressive and beautiful. There are many other actors, even civic society organizations, NGOs, that are working with an agenda that is based on anti-migrant with anti-migrant feelings, anti-gender feelings, anti-European Union feelings, anti-climate change discourses. This is part of this work. We could talk a lot about that, but well, I will go back to the next phase, especially this intersection. No, but they are there. And for example, these faith actors who work with LGBTIQ+ people, they also have relationships with LGBTIQ+ organizations. Say, okay, well, the priest going to give, which is one of the most important. Yes, and give calling Caritas, to ask for some help for this Muslim gay man who needs something. This is happening. And this is probably very, very, very interesting. They are also part of this network, the network of Christianity. And I use Christianity as an umbrella term. There include Pentecostals, Catholics, evangelists, churches from the Reform, etc., etc., etc. Well, I don't want to take a lot of time, but why Christianity? Well, I'm speaking about Latin Americans going to Spain. 99% of them are Catholic, and 99% of the organization in Spain doing this are Christians, sorry, not Catholic, Christians. No? But within Christianity, it's not always this. It's like civil society. There are many people within the churches helping these organizations. There are many people who don't like this idea because they are helping those sinners who are out of the natura, etc., etc., etc. So they inhabit these complex intersections, and their authority comes from these complex intersections. And but it's also limited by them. No, I use this. I'm thinking of guidance, theoretical framework. No, their agency is enabled and constrained at the same time by this structure, but at the same time they influence the structures and they try to make changes in civil society, in the state, and within Christianity. So. Well, this is a way to just that I found to say, okay, there they are. No? These five factors are like in the middle of this big structure of state, churches, and civil society. And on the other hand, on the other side, it's the refugees. And they have exactly the same relationship. The influence of them, but refugees are influencing these faith factors. So, I don't know if this is going to work. Oh, of course not. Okay, never mind. Well, because the question is, okay, but this at some point I need to speak about race. No? When is race coming? I'm sorry. I mean, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the strategies they use toward LGBTIQ plus asylum claimants. And my first focus was not on race. I'm honest, no? But unfortunately, I don't know why the video is not working. This video is from MFJMCE, a fantastic organization in Madrid. If we could watch the video, we would see the faces of the people, and you can easily see why we need to speak of race, and not only of race, but especially of ethnicity. Because most of the faces there are clearly Latin Americans, very Latin Americans, except for one guy who is from Morocco. So, how do these five actors respond? I will, of course, these are just preliminary conclusions, but I just want to highlight some points that are related to race. The first point is the idea of language barriers. Of course, Latin Americans it's a little easier for them. It is a little easier. But not only because they speak Spanish, because of the Christian background where they come from. They easily understand a language, and I'm not speaking about Spanish. They easily understand the spiritual or the religious geographies. They know what happens when they get into the temple. They know what a priest is. They know what a pastor is. They have been leaders in their churches. Probably they were persecuted exactly because of that. So they easily become leaders of these faith actors. Most of the people I interviewed in Spain were Colombians, Venezuelans, Peruvians, Nicaraguans who are now running these projects, but they are refugees, LGBT refugees themselves. No? That is very different. I mean, in the case of other kind of migrants, this is very different. But here there's another point, because most of the LGBT projects are run or the leaders are Latin Americans. But in all the other projects, the leaders are people from Morocco or from Africa. Why? I will be a little rude, but I don't care. Yes, because I mean, two reasons, and I'm just quoting one of the interviews. Because they look good in the website. No, it's I mean, in a good sense. I mean, it's great to show that we are helping these people who are not Christian, or we are not Christian. They are probably Muslims, but they are working with us, and they are leaders. No? And because many LGBT people from the north of Africa, they could never be leaders because they would be persecuted by their community in Spain. So it's difficult for them to visualize what they are. So race matters a lot. And well, then the other point that I have here is what do they show and what do they hide? So what I found, especially conducting some virtual ethnography, is that when the faith actors, they have strategies that explicitly target queer asylum claimants, you will not find any religious symbol in their websites. So religion is invisible. The other way about, when they include queer asylum migrants in their regular projects, no, they don't make a difference a priori, but then when they receive, they treat them like, and they are doing a good job, okay? But they are not showing, I wrote there, queerness, no, but nothing related to LGBT people. So they are, at some point, they are reinforcing this idea of religion is here and queerness or non-heteronormative sexualities are there, and we cannot mix this. And about race and ethnicity here is also very, very interesting, because on the one hand, they are reproducing this gay enough or Spaniard enough logic that at the end of the day is the same logic of the system, of the legal system. Because yes, you can be gay, but you have to be gay in a particular way to fit. And I will give you, I mean, in general, and this is a generalization for gays and lesbians, and well, bisexual is always very complex, but it's not a problem. But for trans people, it is, especially when they are indigenous trans people from Latin America. I will give you an example. Landlords and Migraciones, they had a very interesting project that is with pictures. It's called Migrant Nature. It is online, so if you want Naturaleza Migrante, you can look at it. One of there was a trans woman, indigenous from, I don't remember exactly, but from Central America. So she wanted her picture like dressed in a, let's say, an indigenous way. That means no top. No? And I was about to say the priest, but it was not only the priest, just the people from the organization said, no, we cannot do that. Say, why? I thought it's maybe because some moral thing. No, it was because, I mean, transsexual women are so sexualized, their bodies are so instrumentalized that we don't want her to be showing her boobs just because she's reinforcing, okay, and she was saying, okay, no, this has to do with who I am. I am not European. This is how I dress in my country. No? So it's very, very difficult, but you know, this is a way of reenacting this Christian heteronormativity. Okay, I have a lot of examples, but I don't want to take a lot of time. So, just some preliminary conclusions, because I have a lot of work to do. I chose two words. First, complex. I mean, complexities in these intersections are, I mean, they multiply. And every time I start just working with my data, I discover that it's always different. So it's not good, at least for me, to say they are good or they are bad. It's not an either-or logic, but rather neither nor. They are doing it, and this is my second point, they are highly influential in a very good way. They are doing a great job. I was surprised. I'm very critical. I expected therapies of conversion and these kind of things. I didn't see that. I see that they were really friendly. But at the same time, they are representing this heteronormativity probably from the country of origin or from Spain, and especially this national homonormativity, this gay enough, Spaniard enough categories when they run their programs. So at the end, my hypothesis or my big conclusion is that they are influential, they are doing a good job, but while they try to enable the integration and the reception and integration, at the same time they are constraining some aspects of this integration and this reception of LGBTIQ+ Latin Americans who seek asylum in Spain. Thank you very much.
Well, now we have, I'm sure you have many questions for these fantastic panelists. So please go to the microphone and identify yourself. And please, you know, we're ready for you guys.
Thanks for asking.
Yes.
So, well done. So,
there is a...
So I asked the last time if assimilation was good or not. I think we have a clear answer to this one. But so the question is, what are some ways to kind of counteract assimilation? When migrants or immigrants, they come to a new country, they're expected to, for example, LGBTQ, they're expected to assimilate with religions, right? Or in general, when a culture is forced to kind of move because of situations, right, that are not safe in their own country, then these diasporas create in these other countries. And a tendency is for this expectation for them to assimilate, to get rid of their own culture. So what are some ways that we can help these refugees, these asylums, these people in need of help without removing who they are? Anyone can answer.
You decide.
No, you decide.
Somebody talk.
I'll start with answering this question. I appreciated you asking that question earlier too, and I understand your name is Jordan. Your professor wanted me to know that. So hi, Jordan. Jordan, you brought up that question earlier about the role of assimilation, right? But what you need to understand is that every nation has a different approach to how they integrate in migrants. It could be assimilation, it could be acculturation, right? And then there's different forms of it within. So you ask the question, how do we move beyond assimilation where they were taking away their cultural norms and values and thereby their identity? You need to first ask yourself the question, what is the norms of the society in which they're in? Once you determine the norms of the society in which they're in and how those norms are reinforcing specific values of either equity or injustice, right, in that space right there. So you need to first think about that first. Understand the dynamics of it, assimilation versus acculturation, and then the different types that are in each of these countries. Now, how do you challenge that? Well, you go back to the other word I just said, norms. You got to challenge the norms in the society. You got to educate the society to move beyond these myopic kind of thinking.
One Carlos said they get to speak up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's education, right? And then also in that education, once you educate people, they're able to inform others of the reality of the world in which we're in, and to have empathy for each other, right? Because we have a problem, I think, we have a lack of empathy. We only see the world through a specific lens. My lens is purple, so I only see the world as purple. But your lens is yellow, so you only see it as yellow. Why can't we layer our lens to understand the complex system that we're in? So start with education, and then with that education, if you're doing it from the ground up approach, speak up, but you be educated first. Don't just speak up just to speak up, as we know a lot of politicians are doing, but doing it with an educated space, and then let that thrive in promoting voice and agency. And then why not get involved with civil society organizations? They are thriving, and many of these international and national groups realize how important they are. Despite what Kristen said, I love that she's working in the space here in America. Well, a number of my students are working with civil society organizations in DC, right? But they are constantly being challenged with the politicians. So when you're going in it, if you want to challenge this assimilation approach, understand the complex environment you're in, and don't just try to go in there with a gung-ho. Understand it first, and then go about bringing about change. Assimilation, culturation. I'll leave it right there. Kristen, you want to say something?
I mean, the only thing I would add to that is if you have the opportunity to be in a space where people who've experienced forced migration are there, follow their lead. I mean, some people feel safer assimilating at first for a lot of reasons, especially the Afghan community that I just talked about. Right? They're very often, especially in Miami, there's not many of them, they're very often seen as different, and that comes out in every conversation, and so some of them choose not to be. And that's got to be their choice for now, while they feel out whether or not it's comfortable to be who they are. So in your process of figuring out how to help people feel comfortable, recognize that they get to lead the way in that. And then, yeah, be curious, ask questions, get to know somebody from a personal level, right? Not just about their culture or whatever, but them, who they are, why it's important to them, why assimilation, acculturation, or something else in general is really important to them. Each person who has migrated here has a decision on that. And they make it, and they evolve in it, and it's a conversation at home, and it's a conversation with their kids, and it's a conversation with their parents and their grandparents. Like, it's big, and it changes, right? So be open and curious to the conversation of the individual. And then just be really aware, just like we are in general when it comes to anything printed or anything discussed about a Muslim person or whatever, like be aware, right, as how we are talking about people and how we are targeting people and how we are recognizing who is acceptable and who is not. And so I know I used a lot of air quotes in all this, but get to know the person. I guess that would be my first start, and let them lead the way. So.
That's very, very short. Speak up, but don't speak if you don't know. That's mine, and I'm not telling you that to you, but to myself. Yes, and I will give you a beautiful example in one of my conversations with a nun in Spain. She received, from one day to another, I mean, she was not expecting it. They opened the house, and this organization sent her 5 people that were from Central America, 2 gays, 1 transgender person, and 2 women. I don't know their sexual orientation, but this is what she told me. No? So again, and she told me I was expecting a family with a couple of kids. I don't know how to deal with this. I didn't know how to deal with this at that moment. I said, okay, I will use my common sense. Girls with girls, boys with boys. The 2 gays in one room, the 3 women in another room. From my perspective, I said, okay, that's fantastic. I mean, she was open-minded enough to treat this transgender woman as a woman, because she is a woman. But with the Catholic bias, you can say, okay, we could expect something different. But then the transgender woman went to her and said, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with these 2 women. Can I move with the guys? And in that moment she said, okay, I'm very stupid. She used another word. Why didn't I ask? It would have been easier. Ask them, where do you want to be? What do you want to do? No? That's why I'm saying it's not only, I mean, yes, we need to speak up, but we also need to listen. So the question is not how do we help them. At some point, we need to ask how are they going to help me to get a different understanding of these situations.
I wanted to ask Mr. Fiocchetto for a little bit. I know I mentioned it earlier, but I am an immigrant. I'm an L.C.S.W and a TPS holder. But you know, you mentioned this idea of, you know, the narrative. Like, what are you setting? What kind of people are you accepting? What kind of people are you showing? What are you hiding? That kind of thing. So coming from Venezuela and seeing how, at least in the U.S., I know you talked about Spain, but I'm trying to bring it back to the U.S. What gives this country the right to filter people? Like, to put labels on them? Like you mentioned, it's really difficult to actually say who deserves help and who doesn't, because in an ideal world, everybody gets help. I want to ask you, and anybody can answer, this is my first question. What gives them the right?
Yes, I'm sorry?
Her name is Lara.
Lara. Okay, thank you, Lara, for the question. I'm still thinking of something about your previous question that probably we can discuss later. Yes, because it was a very good one. And this one is also a very good question. And you said 2 very important words, narratives, and you speak about deserve. We speak about deservingness. Now, this narrative of deservingness. In the case of the actors that I study, and just I need for you to know, my fieldwork is in Spain and the US, so I have some experience here too. They need this, they make this narrative of deservingness because it's a tool they use to sell their product. No, this is what, because they are in this difficult system where they need to go to the government and say this is what we do. And that implies a narrative of deservingness. She deserves, or he deserves, asylum because of this or because of that. The problem is, how are we constructing the image of this asylee? The other question is more complex. Why the states have the right to say who deserves and who doesn't deserve? And that's a question that I have. And it has to do with what we are as I mean, in our world. I mean, we are ruled by states. And I said that in the previous panel, yes, but there is a human right that is universal. We should be able to apply and enjoy asylum everywhere. However, the state is the ones who say yes or no. You deserve it, you don't deserve it. This is, I mean, but at the same time, we also need some regulations. So this is that balance is very, very.
Can I add to that? So having worked also with undocumented individuals, I will say that it's political and it's gross, right? So at the end of the day, a government gets to decide whether or not somebody is a refugee in part, frankly. Am I still being recorded to say screw you to another government, right? You cannot take care of your people, so we will. That is why some people get refugee status and some people don't. Mexican immigrants, for example, do have every right to come in here just as anybody else would, but they will never get refugee or asylum status because we don't have a contentious relationship with their government. I hate that that is the system, but that is absolutely the system. So when there is an opportunity to use people as political pawns, governments do. And so they are able to say, you didn't do a good job with your people, so now I have to take care of them, and look at that, which they're more willing to do sometimes, i.e. refugee status and asylum. Medium willing to do, i.e. TPS, it might change, not willing to do undocumented, right? That's from my perspective how it goes, and it is gross. Also, yeah, we end up painting these incredibly horrific stories of people being needy when, to be honest, I don't know if I could ever survive any of the stories that I've heard, let alone, so people are not incapable in any way, shape, or form, but we do end up painting that story for, in the U.S., charity, so that we can get more funding, so we can do more things. It's all very gross, but also the system that we have right now, so let's work to fix it, I guess. I don't know, but I'm glad you asked the question, thank you.
And also, since you talked about the system,
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm sure you know this, but they're processing asylums from 2007 today. 2007.
Yeah.
So is there an effort happening to push for things, or?
So it got extra complicated during the Trump administration, as we all know, because all of a sudden, those who were in line got pushed back, right? Because the Trump administration wanted to be able to process people that came in during the Trump administration in order to show their numbers. I'm going to assume that's the reason. I don't know the reason. But it got screwed over. Is there a system? Yes, but we would need acts of Congress to change things. We would need to be able to change how many asylum immigration officers we have, how many judges we have, and how we make these decisions. And we can't even talk about immigration at this point without everybody losing their minds. So I don't think we're close to it, unfortunately. I wish we were. But no, for the moment, unfortunately, we're a little bit stuck. Sorry.
But thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, my question for Dr. Washington. So you had talked about the negative impact of technology, and while I don't know a whole lot on cryptocurrency, I know that it's cheaper and faster than other payment methods. And so I was wondering, when it comes to diasporas and funding conflicts in their homeland, if cryptocurrency is playing more of a role.
So is the illicit market playing a role inside of the peace wreckers, right? I did say they can be peacemakers too. So yes, because these markets are allowing them to submit the funds through illicit ways. Or they submit it directly to a family member through remittances. So are these type of coins, Bitcoins, playing a role? Yes, that's why we find the government is trying to do more regulations on it now. They've been increasing that conversation in the past 4 years or so, or a little bit longer, right? Because they understand on how important these currencies are, not just in respect to promoting conflict, possibly, but also the possibility of them gaining funds from it in these spaces. So is it playing a role? Yes, ma'am. Will it go away anytime soon when it comes to cryptocurrency? No, I only assume that it will increase in the future.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, Kristen.
Hello, my name is Carlos Rodriguez. I'm a student of Dr. Arraras. And my question is for Dr. Washington. You established that diasporas are agents and accelerators of peace. Yet, as a Venezuelan migrant who has lived here for over 10 years, I have seen that here in Florida, Cuban and Venezuelan communities have often lobbied the U.S. government for a confrontational approach towards their home countries with policies that could be considered harmful for their countries. And they have had some reasonable political success. So my question to you is, could you say that in this case, the diasporas played a negative role in the achievement of peace?
Can they play an achievement role? Yes, I would agree with that question. But they also can play a role in promoting peace. As I noted that they can provide funds to promote the ammunition. Also, we find that they actually go back home to engage in battle in the homeland as a warrior, as a soldier. So diasporas can be harmful. However, they can be also a place of good in respect to mobilizing and promoting development activities. I think sometime when it gets down to diasporas actually being deconstructive, is first asking yourself, what is the relationship between these two political nation states? And that could play a role too, because it's based on, U.S. relations. You brought up Venezuela. How is that affecting the decision to reinforce conflict in that homeland? And how is U.S. in some ways implicitly supporting it in some ways, right? By not preventing it from occurring. Whereas we find in other countries where they want to maintain good relationship, they prevent that as much as possible from occurring. So to answer your question, yes, they can be harmful. Yes, they have been harmful. But I also want you to understand that there's a complex relationship between these political environments, between nation states. And we need to think about how do we mobilize them more in a positive way. And then last but not least, what space do they have inside of the country they're in to be a product of good? Or do they have that space? For instance, the United States of America, we have CSOs. They are working with the U.S. government. However, the U.S. government work with them more so, unfortunately, and Christine deferred, I look forward to that conversation. They work with them more as a top-down format, rather than working with them collaboratorily. So it's a complex relationship and there's many dynamics to it. So can they? Yes, we do find that in the data and they do it often. We found that, for instance, in Sudan. We found it also when it came to Rwanda. We find it also going on right now in Ukraine. So they can play a significant role in promoting conflict.
Would you say that in time there could be a split in socio-political ideology? For example, in Venezuela, I can see that many people here support sanctions. There's a study from the Catholic University and Astrid in Venezuela that most people inside Venezuela does not support it. So could there be an ideological difference between diaspora and the people in the country that could grow over time?
Yeah, because the diaspora doesn't only include the first generation. It could include the second generation and the third and the fourth, right? With these diasporic spaces. So not only generational, but also once they move from maybe the country of origin to a new hosted country, they're dealing with new norms. And they may make the choice to assimilate rather than acculturate. So how does that build onto their current identity? And or maybe they left because they didn't agree with that political environment they were in. So yeah, it can create new political ideologies in their homeland, especially with the role of digital technology. And we find that to be the case increasingly with, for instance, who are the presidents that they're putting in various governments and the role that they're playing. I mean, I think we can quickly go to Venezuela on that one, right? And how the diaspora is playing a role here in influencing the political environment and ideology in those spaces. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Camilla. I'm one of Dr. Washington's students. I was just wondering how diasporas and how the civil society's limits influence the level of influence that diasporas have. So, as you mentioned, civil society have very short-term goals, stability. You don't know when it's going to change. How does that influence the influence of diasporas in helping refugees?
That's a great question. Sure. It limits it in terms of funding, but it doesn't necessarily limit it in terms of capacity, right? So there are a lot of great diaspora-run organizations and organizations that are using a lot more diaspora to help them figure out how better to serve different communities. But of course, the organizations that are sort of more established, like the resettlement organizations, that's going to change based on the population that's coming in, whereas the organizations that are more refugee self-help, but that's what it's called in the funding, that those will be more stable. So that is to say that they have a lot of power within their own communities to mobilize here in the US in the sense of making sure people know how to vote when they're eligible, making sure people know how to use the services that are available when eligible, making sure people know how to use their voices and know that they're able to hear in a way that maybe they weren't able to at home. And they are looked at as leaders in home country, right? So depending on who they are, especially if they're also working in organizations here, that sort of elevates them in their home countries as well. So I'm thinking specifically of the Bhutanese population that I've had a lot of opportunity to work with, and they have this beautiful sort of back and forth between the communities, even though they can't go home, right? They can't return and do anything. They can certainly send remittance. They do create music and art and whatnot and send it home, and they also use Reiki and whatnot here to keep their relationship with their community alive here. And so there's a lot of opportunity for that to continue. It changes over time due to what is available funding-wise from the federal government, but it also changes as they build their communities, right? So the federal government provides support for those sorts of organizations for 5 years. But as people start to understand who is in the community and who matters, that changes who's funding them, and that changes the longevity of the program and the ability to continue serving people and working with people and building community around people that are already community leaders in these areas. So that is to say, there's no limit on them, and that's super helpful for resettlement because then they can transfer people over to a community that is already there waiting to help them find their way and eventually become leaders in their own right. So that's my take on it, but I really love the refugee communities that are already doing things with each other because it is much better. So, did you want to add that?
Yes, I'll be the evil guy here. And then show no like the other face of the other side of the coin here. But probably not speaking about refugees, but when we speak about migration and we speak about these diasporas, I completely agree that they have the power to mobilize these social groups for good and for bad. No? And Florida is a great example of this. The most anti-migrant groups in Florida are migrants themselves. No? Spain is very similar. No? We can explain that. We have a lot of ways of explaining it. Yes, we can find a lot of explanation, but it is also part of the situation. Together, she said, I mean, I completely agree, and my experience has to do with that, no? But I cannot forget this also, that this is also going on. No? It's not black and white, because there are a lot of grays out there.
I know you have a follow-up. I know
Yes.
Yes, she's dying.
Completely irrelevant, not irrelevant, it's another question. You mentioned how you were thinking about, when you were thinking about the faith actors, you thought they were going to be more involved with religion when it came to LGBTQ, all that. I was asking if in your experience, I'm so sorry, how do you say your last name?
You can just call me Kristen.
Okay.
My last name is a pain in the butt, so it's okay.
Perfect. Well, Kristen, in your experience, do you, like you said that the 9 main agencies in the United States were also mainly religion. Do you find the same findings as them? Like, they're not
You'll know better than I do because you looked at this more closely. I will say that there are sometimes inherent conflicts, like when somebody of a particular background shows up at a different, especially like HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society sometimes has challenges with the Syrian this work also for a very long time, right? So they're in it to help refugees. But it is a challenge for somebody to show up at a different religious space to receive help. So some of the ways that organizations have worked through that is to make sure that they have partnerships with local mosques, if that's the example, or with local secular organizations, if that's the example, to make sure people feel safe coming in, because they're not necessarily going to, right? One of the reasons, totally anecdotally, but one of the reasons that the Red Cross is also the Red Cross and Red Crescent is because people felt more comfortable making sure that what they were going to was something that had a faith that was similar to theirs when they were seeking help. We know that, and so we have to be able to be flexible with it. But we are a world in the US as well as in Spain that is based on charity from religion first, for better or worse. That is where most of our charities started from, so that is the starting point for this as well. There are, of course, several that are not religious based, so that is helpful. But you end up going to, refugees coming to the US don't get to choose who serves them. They just sort of get assigned, which is a little bit complicated as well. So I will let you speak more to this, because this is your area of expertise.
Yes. Well, yes, first I agree with most of the things that Kristen said. My experience here in the US is not very different than what I saw in Spain. There is everything out there, no? Especially when we speak about religion. And I always said this, we have been asking religions to deconstruct themselves, to understand a lot of things, for example, gender identities. Well, now we as scholars need to deconstruct our understanding of religions to understand that it's not black and white, or if you're religious, you cannot be gay, because they are doing a lot. There are a lot of huge developments of theology, from the more theoretical to the more practical level. Of course, this is not in every congregation, in every church, and in the church. I'm speaking about, I will speak about the Catholic Church because it's probably the most, it's a great example, no? Because it's this huge hierarchical umbrella where you can find the Opus Dei and Theology of Liberation, and both of them are Catholics. And you will find a very strict, heteronormative, white-loving, this idea of the family, mother, father, and two kids, and you will find church, within the Catholic Church, groups that are LGBTIQ+ groups. So you have everything out there. Of course, I'm explicitly looking at those groups who are working with LGBTIQ+ people, but this is not the whole universe of religion, because they also have to struggle within one of these first circles, the circle of religion. They need to struggle there. And money has to do a lot here, because most of the conservative sectors are the most richest sectors. So, and some of them are not willing to give money to gays and lesbians and these people that you are, and migrants. No, they have everything that we don't want. So it's complex.
The way that really, I'm sorry, I'm going to add one more anecdote because I just thought of it. But I used to work with Lutheran Migration and Refugee Service, and the Lutherans have two very divided elements of themselves. One is very conservative, one is very liberal. I will not remember the names of these two at this moment because I am neither. But they have a council together, and of that council is L.C.S.W, Lutheran Migration and Refugee Service, one of the 9 voluntary agencies that brings in refugees, and one half of their congregation is very conservative. And so they have to do a lot of work internally of helping the stranger and taking it back to scripture and looking at Jesus as a refugee, et cetera, to be able to bring people in, but it is still a very complicated system. And our civil society comes to one-on-one individual conversations that are so important because we're not always in the rooms with everybody else. And so if you're in a room where somebody's saying something that you think is maybe a little misguided, give them your ideas. See if they can think through it a little differently, because that will change things.
Can I add on for you, Camilla, too? Not just in respect to the specific information they provided, and thank you guys for that. When you're thinking about movement of population and decision-making process, we have a tendency to assume that these migrants are not moving with knowledge, or they're not moving with, connections with possibly family or friends, or just looking on the internet to see when to move, where to move, the time to move, right? So they're doing their research before they come, right? So they're getting some information in respect to what is the possibilities for jobs to get that regularity of life that I discussed, to be able to mobilize with CSOs to bring change at home. But not only are they doing that, they are understanding the system, the law, the legal system that they're going with, as the young lady spoke about earlier, and some of the complexities with it. They don't know all of it, but they have a tendency to know more than the basic U.S. citizen, I can tell you that. But they also are looking at the role that they're thinking about, how do they self-identify when they go to these various organizations. Should I identify as gay? Should I identify as lesbian? Or should I just be quiet? And I want to bring that up specifically because the numbers that you saw Ernesto bring earlier is not 100% numbers either, because it's only based on those who identified as such. So there's a lot of them that haven't identified either. So when you're thinking about this in respect to movement and when they move and where they move and what they know, understand it's very complex, but they're trying to get as much information as possible prior to moving. Still they're being challenged when they get into these spaces too.
Sorry, I will add something to that. It's really interesting, and this is probably more part of my dissertation, the role of religious organization in this situation, because I mean the states do. I mean you don't go to the consulate of Spain to say, okay, I'm going to Madrid, no. But you speak with your priest, and the priest who is a Jesuit or a Mercedario or whatever, holds a phone, send an email to the other one and they monitor all the movement from one point to the other.
And these phones play a big role.
Oh, yes.
Hello, good afternoon, my name is Michael. I'm one of the students of Dr. Arraras' class. I preface my comments by saying that I commend the efforts that are being made on the street level, community level, to try to help with migration and refugees and asylum and people of the LGBTQ community. But for a moment, I'd like to see if it doesn't fall outside the boundaries of the conference. If we go 30,000 feet instead of at street level, and go, instead of addressing the migrants when they get here, or the asylum seekers when they're trying to get into our country, and I don't want to sound like I'm a Trumpian, because I'm by no means not, but it's like, how can we prevent all this migration trying to come into our country instead of them staying in their own country? And I understand if you have failed states like Syria, Libya, Haiti, as an example, they're helpless. There's nothing that we can do as far as American foreign policy to try to get in a relationship with the local governments to try to help them with the problems that exist that are causing the migration. So I'm just curious, in your studies or research, what you've learned as far as the United States and the European Union trying to use their economic power, flex their economic power to try to work with the central governments where most of these people are coming from to try to address the problems that are local in their countries, to try to stabilize their governments and stabilize their social situation. Maybe I'm being, idealistic or delusional, or I don't know, but just like they did in, I'm not trying to find some moral comparison with like the Marshall Plan in Europe after World War II, but to prevent communism from expanding into Western Europe, the United States infused billions and billions of dollars to essentially rebuild the economies of these countries. Why do I not see that being attempted in our own hemisphere, in Western Hemisphere? Why aren't they doing that in Central America? Or maybe they are, and I don't know it, but I don't see it. I'm just curious as to your comments, your opinions on that.
I'll start by saying that's true. There is a passive response when there is a refugee crisis that could have been an active response by political actors prior to. What the right response is, I don't know, but it should, in my opinion, it doesn't need to get to a refugee crisis, because you know that's what's happening. Government to government, you know what's happening. Now, what is the right response? I will leave that to my colleagues because you guys study this stuff. I just know that it seems very passive that we believe that people are suffering. And then we accept them in, but we still don't do anything about the reason that they're suffering. So.
One of the things that I used to study when I was first doing my dissertation, and then after, at heart, I always want to be a practitioner, right? And I was saying, this is a problem, but how do we resolve it? I'm from the Gullah culture, and we always about how do we resolve the issue? How do we deal with the issue, the root causes? So I believe one of the things that hasn't been done systemically enough, and hasn't been done pretty much, I don't think much at all, is countries sharing information. If you can create one database system and have it monitored by numerous individuals from all the countries in the world are part of the UN, and have that information being shared, then that would be beautiful, showing the movement of people when they move, right? First, share information, but the limitation on that part is security, sovereignty, and also political willingness. There's a lack of political willingness, right? And then the other issue is that, you know, when you think about these root causes, and how do we know that how do we get to the root causes of it, is that countries are not seemingly, as I noted, intentionally, collaboratively working with CSO, civil society organizations that are on the ground, that has the deep knowledge. They're more so doing it in performative ways. If they work with these CSOs that have deep knowledge and place that also on the database, along with information that, for instance, Southcom has, and they have that, by the way, along with the information that Belgium has, right? You know, he was talking about Belgium, and you know she's in the Belgium space, right? Yes, right there. If we can share this information, I think we can, you know, understand the dynamics of the world more and be able to get to the root causes and have the true willingness for change.
I'm shocked that we don't have that type of a global database. The globalization of
the database doesn't have all the countries in it. It's very small, and there's only a few of them that have working together. And she want to add in. Yes, she's one of the presentation. Yes. Go.
I'm sorry, I just wondering what kind of information, because we have a lot of information available on the UN level, OECD level. There is a lot, like I work with Central America. The thing is, at the European level, our neighborhood, etc. The thing is that it's very difficult to underpin what are the root causes on the one hand. And all the countries now, the US is saying, oh, the problem in the North Triangle is governance. EU is saying, okay, the problem is governance a lot, so we need some corruption, that's, you know, weak governance, etc. So how are you strengthening them? So the thing is that we do not really have an answer, but another problem that we have to admit, as something that has been said, it's not the poorest people who are migrating. So again, I'm sorry bringing back the Eastern European example, but Eastern Europeans are migrating a lot to Western Europe. Though our living standards, they are improved. So the problem is that sometimes you can't really ask, you know, it's the question how to make societies more secure, but when we ask how to make people come less, that's where it goes problematic, because honestly we don't know. And I'm not even sure if it's a good question to ask, because it's very difficult. We don't have answers. It's very easy to go, you know, to these very, very simplistic ways that try to, you know,
Well, I know it's not simplistic. I know it's
but
extreme.
there's a lot of studies on the root causes, and no one has an answer.
There's no one root cause, but I want to challenge you for a minute. The databases, even the UNHCR has, the IOM has, even those different hubs, database on the movement of people and when they move and what the numbers are, and even the information that Southcom has, they're not intentionally sharing all this information with the different governments. So one database on the movement, that's what I'm thinking of. For movement, when they move, why they move, right? For the root causes, the other part would be intentionally working collaboratively with the local individuals, citizens that has the deep knowledge. The young lady, I think earlier even talked about, she said, when she asked a question of the previous panel, I heard you said, well, the information you guys have is totally different from the information I have. And that we need to understand that. We need to tap into these information networks to truly understand the dynamics. But even when we can share information, just even on hubs, they don't want to bring that information out. I love you guys.
I just want that it's like more of a lack of political will.
Yeah.
That if you have the political willpower and recognize the problem and amass the experts on mobilizing that in the same direction. And maybe again, I'm being idealistic, but I think that with the amount of economic power that the European Union and the United States wield, that there's ways of attacking corruption on a local level in these countries, attacking poverty, improving economic opportunities there, instead of all these people running up to the border, trying to get into our country because they're desperate. And I recognize that.
Don't forget, before Ernesto speaks, don't forget, people have been moving since the dawn of time when they moved out of
Believe me, I know.
Africa. So,
My ancestry dates back 3 diasporas.
oh, love it. So when you're
From
thinking about
Jerusalem
this.
to Turkey and Spanish Inquisition, so I know all about it. You know?
But when people move, they're deciding where to move based on the information that they're getting from their family, friends, or whatever. So that's playing a role. But the root causes, we gotta get everybody at the table to work together. But you already know, we already said earlier, the civil society organization, as much as they can work positively, and individuals can work positively, we can be negative and promote problems. And as the young lady spoke up earlier about the media can be a great tool of good, but they have a tendency to promote national norms. So I'm not gonna keep it, I'm sorry, but I love it though.
Just let me add something, and I'm sorry to say this, but we also have to say that the economic power that the US and the European Union has, or the global north has, is absolutely related with the crisis in the global south. If we analyze the relationship between the United States and the interventions of the country in the North Triangle in Central America, well, at some point we need to say we can help them, but we have to assume that we have been responsible for this too. I'm not saying that the US is the only responsible for that.
I mean, on the local level.
And just let me add something else. For me, the other perfect example is climate change and climate refugees. Why do we have climate refugees in Africa if they are supposed to be probably the most clean environment? Because of the emissions of carbon from where? Global north. So it's complex. It's really complex.
And I know, especially when you're dealing with former European colonies who were exploited, people from slavery, the diaspora from Africa, there's a lot of distrust there. And typically the United States seems to act when it's in their best interest, you know, and they gain a benefit from it. But I have to believe that there's some benevolent powers that are within the foreign policy community that can act on this. But again, I might just be a rabid idealist.
Thank you so much, Mike. And after the panel ends, we can continue talking about these very important issues that you're pointing out. Thank you so much. And the last question?
Yes, I'll be sure, I promise.
Yes.
So I hear a lot of frustration in this topic. It always brings frustration. It's horrible. I'm going to bring to the table more frustration. So my question is mainly about refugees, so I mainly focus on Christine, but everyone can answer and we'd love to hear it. When I was working with refugees at Catholic Charities, we encountered a few months where we didn't know if we were going to renew contract again because our program was facing closure through DeSantis' new policies that it was going to come on. For everyone to know, I used to work with unaccompanied children with our refugee kids that cross the border alone without their parents. So when I tell you that this program is needed, you have no idea. It's needed as we need oxygen to breathe. These kids are traumatized to the point that they don't even understand normal behaviors. So, my question would be, what can we do as citizens? Because I remember going to work every day frustrated and not knowing if I was going to see these kids again in 3 months, and I knew they needed us there. So what can we do as citizens to help these programs to not get closure? Because it's not only my program, it's so many other programs out there that these kids are just taken out in the street or like leaving just there, hanging, and they're just disappointed in the United States and the people and everyone, that we failed them. Are we able to help out, speak up and be let's put some money into this, and what can we do for that?
Well, yes, and, right? So the first part of your question is we need to speak up more. I also worked with those kids for a long time, and they are unbelievably so much that it breaks my heart still, and I haven't worked with them directly in a family situation if they get to the US. What kid doesn't have a superhero fantasy? They just happen to act on it because they had to, either because of gang violence or because of somebody in the family dying or because of whatever. They acted on it. And now they're stuck in this system that is not built for them. And so first thing is getting people to understand that this is not an old story, it's a current story. This is not about kids who are misbehaving, and it wouldn't matter if it were. This is about kids who are trying their damnedest to do something. And in fact, if we wanted to make the comparison to kids who were working in factories back in the Second World War or the First World War, we could. They're the same kids. They're still working in factories. We're still ignoring them. We're still overlooking them. They're still the reason we have a child welfare system in this country in the first place. So we could be making those arguments and making them stronger. And you can do that because you have some of those stories to tell. You just tell them from the perspective of how it impacted you. Because you're the adult. And adults listen to adults, and it's stupid and it's frustrating, and I'm not going to even begin to talk about how absurd that is because kids have more information. But okay, you're the adult. You can talk adult language. You can tell your story of that and why you don't do it anymore and why it's so hard. I try to as well when I can, to be honest. I also lose my patience quite often, as you can tell, as I'm raising my voice. And so I don't always anymore. But it is necessary. As far as kids themselves are concerned, there are still a lot of underground programs that are still active in this state as well as others. There are often different clothing drives and food drives and whatever drives to try and help them, but it's also about noticing them, right? If there's a kid in a situation that doesn't look like they're old enough to be working in, notice them. You don't have to do much more than that. They may or may not tell you anything, but make sure you see them. They're not invisible, and they do matter. And that matters to them, and that changes their opportunity experience. So those are the two takeaways. Speak up, notice them.
And maybe the leaders in the government, right?
Yeah. If you allow me to answer to, I'm going to speak real quick because I want to defer, before it goes to Ernesto, I want to defer part of my time to my Belgian colleague that had her hand up all earlier as well. In my opinion, you asked what do we do, I think this is why they had this panel last, right? If you want to activate, get involved. Get involved with civil society organization, get involved with the international organization. Or as we say in the security field, like, see something, say something. And if I could give the latter of my time, I'm going to stop right there because I know she has. Earlier from Mike.
Yeah, I was actually, I'm going to put my other colleague on the spot. I got a great quote from her over lunch. It's in response to your question about benevolent leaders and sovereignty. And I hope you remember the quote that I was talking about. The last question.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Sorry. Okay. Oh, gosh. Do you want me to contextualize? Because
Sure.
I think we have a lot of reasons, root causes that are being discussed as to why, immigration is being regulated the way it is. And I think one of the things that I, from a legal lens, look at is, our international legal order is based on nation states, and nation states are led by leaders, and leaders need votes, and votes are easily acquired when you present a dichotomous situation, right, amongst others about immigration. And so what you've got is an unnuanced discourse about immigration, because it's the last thing that they can really hold on to in a globalized world as a means of asserting national sovereignty. And that brings me to you.
Yeah, so I'll be very brief, sorry. So I'm a political scientist by training, and yeah, this issue of, why, it also ties into what somebody asked earlier, of like, why do states get to regulate kind of who gets to enter and leading and preserving this? And part of that comes to the very basis of the kind of Westphalian order of nation states. So, each country, is over a particular territory. The government, the state, central state, is kind of given the sovereignty to both dictate what happens within those borders, but then also kind of control the movement in and out. And so the quote that I shared was really fascinating. It's by Catherine Duverne, who she claims that in this present era of globalization, the movement of people has become the last bastion of sovereignty. And essentially, as the world becomes kind of more open because of
technology, communications, global trade, globalization in general, and the movement of capital goods, but not people. That's kind of like where states are kind of retaining, this is what makes us a country, being able to control kind of the flow of the movement of people. And immigration is such a sensitive topic because it deals with two main things, which are economics, but also identity. And so as a result, this is why we have kind of all of these issues, and sovereignty really plays a central role in that.
Thank you. I mean, with that, that's a great ending, a very thoughtful thought that we can leave you with. Thank you very much for the whole panel, including Dr. Arraras, for